We are just 2 weeks away from the scheduled start of the 2020 baseball season, and Major League Baseball has a good bit to get figured out by then. Hello, everyone, and thanks for tuning in to this Thursday edition of Around the Bases. I'm Chris Brown, as always. We are streaming live on the 110 Sports Network at 110sportsmedia.com/live. And your usual reminder that all 110 Sports Network shows, that includes the J Mole Show with Josh Molnix and Touchline Talk with Josh Doring, are available on demand. Just go to 110sportsmedia.com. There's a videos tab at the top. You can select the show you're looking for. They're also available on demand on our YouTube channel, on Spotify, and on Apple Podcasts in audio form. Just search on any of those platforms for 110 Sports. So we've got a good bit to get to you on the show today. Major developments over the past couple days from the baseball world. No major monologue, no huge topics that we're going to spend 20 plus minutes on today. So you'll see a big list of items here on today's rundown. We'll be bouncing around to a number of different topics, spending a couple minutes with each, and then wrapping up here in about 45 minutes from now. So a lot of little subjects I just want to touch on here briefly on today's show. We're going to start by talking about the testing problems that have continued for Major League Baseball in the last couple of days. When we talked on Tuesday, the league was having significant trouble keeping up with testing and getting results to the teams and the players in the promised 24 to 48 hour window. The league released a statement on Monday saying that there would be this would be cleaned up, the process would be cleaned up, and there's still been some significant problems in the last couple of days. So we'll talk about that. Then we're going to dive into the latest on the new players that we've learned have tested positive, and new players who we hadn't heard from who have arrived at training camps in the last couple of days. After that, we're going to talk briefly about hearing from the players themselves. We're going to talk a little bit about some of the players who've shared their experiences in dealing with COVID-19. Of course, many players have been asymptomatic, but there have been some who certainly have not been. So we'll talk about that. Then we'll dive into some of your other major headlines of the day. And then there's something I want to revisit that we talked about last week. In our very first show, we talked about some of the impacts of the shortened season, of the shortened training camp period on this game itself and what we're going to see from pitchers. We're going to revisit that because I think I may have been wrong about one of those assumptions that I made. So we'll revisit that with some new information later on in the show. And at the end, some odds and ends for you, some interesting fun facts, some interesting streaks coming to an end this season. So we'll touch on that at the end, some little fun, lighthearted things to wrap up this show here on this Thursday. But let's go ahead and start with the big story, which is testing problems continuing for Major League Baseball. On Tuesday, like I said, we talked about the major testing delays that had occurred. We talked about the players and executives who spoke out in frustration of the situation and expressed the feelings, several of them expressing feelings that they were not comfortable with the current situation. Major League Baseball released a statement blaming unforeseen delays over the holiday weekend and saying that they did not expect a recurrence of the problems that occurred, which was players taking tests and teams not receiving results for 3 or 4 days afterwards, teams having to cancel or push back practices, players being held back. The league promised that this would not be something that would become regular, that there would not be reoccurrences of this. But in the days following that statement, there have continued to be problems with test results and getting them quickly enough. On Tuesday, the Giants became the latest team to suspend team workouts due to delayed test results. They finally received their results July 8th, yesterday, and those were the results of the test the team took on the 4th of July. So 4 days to receive those test results, and that's just not acceptable for the situation that baseball is in as far as its restart. That's just not at all going to cut it. The players were promised, as part of the agreement, a 24 to 48 hour turnaround on tests because players are being tested every other day is the plan once things get going, which is now. Players are being tested every other day. They need results before they're being tested a second and third time. They need results from the first test. So maybe you could still blame what happened with the Giants the last couple of days on the weekend, the holiday weekend, maybe. But that excuse certainly is not going to last much longer for Major League Baseball. Also, as reported by the Houston Chronicle yesterday, Astros third baseman Alex Bregman missed the team's workout yesterday due to a delay in processing COVID-19 test results. So on Wednesday, the player had to miss the workout because of test results. So, like I said, this explanation of it being the weekend, being the holiday weekend, being the problem for the testing result delay is running out. That excuse is running out. The source told the Chronicle that Bregman is fine, but this is yet another testing delay impacting players and coaches. And while it's obviously not something horrible on its own, a star player missing 1 day of training camp is not anything that's, horrible, especially relative to everything else that's going on. But this is something that cannot happen during the regular season. MLB clearly has not fixed this problem yet, and this seems to be a more significant problem for the league than it led on Monday in blaming just the holiday weekend as the primary reason for those delays. And player frustration is continuing over this testing problems that Major League Baseball is having right now. On Tuesday, I read you some quotes from general managers and players who expressed frustration on the situation, including the Cubs third baseman Chris Bryant, who said, quote, "I wanted to play this year because I felt it would be safe and I would be comfortable. Honestly, I don't really feel that way." And Oakland Athletics relief pitcher Jake Diekman saying, quote, "We knew there would be hiccups, but we didn't know there would be hiccups with the actual test results because that's basically the number one priority. Everything else is secondary." And as the problems have continued in recent days, so does the frustration, particularly from some prominent players. On Wednesday, Houston Astros outfielder Michael Brantley told reporters, including from the Houston Chronicle, he said, quote, "I want to hear more information about it. I haven't heard much from Commissioner Rob Manfred or from that side. I know that we had to iron out some kinks together, but at the same time, all the players are kind of saying the same thing. We need clarity. And once we get clarity, I think we'll feel better about this." And that's Houston Astros veteran outfielder, widely respected Major League Baseball player Michael Brantley saying, again, all the players are kind of saying the same thing. We need clarity. And that's something that we have not seen from the league in the past week now. We saw that statement from Major League Baseball on Monday, but there was no apology to the players in that. There was no commissioner making a statement, promising better, talking to the media. This just the statement in damage control, which did not explain things at all on Monday, and baseball hasn't really said anything else about that yet. So there's a real lack of accountability from the league right now about what's going on. And if this continues, if there's any more of these testing delays causing problems, I would say the next day or two over the weekend, the 4th of July excuse definitely not going to be a thing that can be used. And, just a regular old statement like what was put out on Monday I don't think that's going to just keep appeasing people. I don't think that, especially with the players very cautious of the situation, very aware of the testing problems, if this happens again, there's going to need to be more. First of all, this can't happen again. It may happen in isolated cases moving forward, but if it happens again, there needs to be better accountability from the league about what's going on. Houston Astros manager Dusty Baker, Brantley's manager, said, quote, "I'm hoping that we can get this straight before it rears its ugly head during the season and a guy can't play. We still have a couple weeks to get this straight, and I'm hoping that's sooner rather than later." So, to be clear, there are still plenty of managers, plenty of players who are optimistic that things will get worked out. And even some players expressing frustration, still many expressing optimism that this will get worked out. But, like I said, excuses from baseball aren't going to last much longer, or aren't going to satisfy people much longer. Another point on the testing: the intake testing is complete after 8 days. ESPN's Marley Rivera reported yesterday afternoon that baseball has completed its intake coronavirus testing process 8 days after it started. There was a grand total of 3,740 tests administered. 66 of them came back positive. That's a rate of 1.8%. The positive tests were comprised of 58 players and 8 staff members. The league has now moved into the second phase of testing, which is the monitoring phase, and that has begun. The first round of that data has come out. There were 2,100, or at least it's been reported by ESPN. That round of data for the first round of the monitoring phase was 2,111 saliva tests, which resulted in 10 positive tests. That's a rate of 0.5%. Also, with testing problems continuing, Major League Baseball, we talked about this on Tuesday, is reportedly, according to Ken Rosenthal of The Athletic, and Major League Baseball and the Players Association are actively pursuing an additional medical lab site for testing. So again, the league on Mondays blaming essentially just the holiday weekend and unforeseen delays, but when you combine the fact that these delays are still occurring, and that the league is reportedly looking for a second site, this seems to be much more of a problem, potentially, than baseball was letting on with that Monday statement. We also have some questions about the testing process itself that have come up in recent days. This reporting from the Dallas Morning News from Tuesday night, that Texas Rangers outfielder Joey Gallo has not been able to participate in team workouts yet. Now, Gallo tested negative for COVID-19 from a test at a Dallas lab with the nasal swab test. And that was actually Gallo's second negative test in the last 10 days. So what's the problem? Well, the problem is he's actually also tested positive twice in that same period with a saliva test from MLB's sanctioned lab in Salt Lake City. So while there's been a concern about the speed of testing and test results, accuracy seems like it could also be a problem at play here. Gallo's agent, Scott Boras, saying, quote, "The testing systems are as accurate as accuracy allows, but there are still going to be false positives, or maybe 1 or 2% of people. The best thing you can do is get as much evidence and testing as possible." Boras also said he represented another player who was in a similar situation, which has been resolved. So perhaps these are just isolated incidents, and it is important to note that it is much better to, of course, have a player sit out a little longer than is necessary, even if they don't have COVID-19, than the other way around. You'd rather have false positives than false negatives for COVID-19. But this is still something we're going to want to keep an eye on moving forward, because the ramifications of this, should it happen during the regular season, could be much more significant, will be much more significant than they are in Gallo just missing a couple days, an established major leaguer missing a couple days of training camp. That's not, like I said before, that's far from a huge problem. But should this happen in a regular season situation, players would have to sit out if this kind of thing happens again. So we'll have to monitor this moving forward. Finally, one final note on the testing problems that Major League Baseball is having. This was an interesting note. Minnesota Twins veteran starting pitcher Rich Hill told reporters on Tuesday that he believes clubhouse personnel should be tested every other day like the players. Hill said that the clubhouse personnel are being tested just twice a week. And that was surprising to me. Now, I may have just missed, this. I didn't read every word of the health and safety protocols. I may have just missed this being a thing, but I was surprised to hear that given the amount of exposure to the players themselves, the clubhouse personnel are tested significantly less than the players. That seems a bit odd. I mean, I understand the players should be tested the most first and foremost, and it's not as if the clubhouse personnel isn't being tested, but given the amount of interaction those two groups have, you'd think that there would be more testing for clubhouse personnel. So I think that's a valid point that Hill raising there for sure, but given the testing problems that the league is having right now already, it seems unlikely they're going to be increasing the amount of tests that they administer to clubhouse personnel. But again, something to keep an eye on moving forward. All right, so we'll shift on from testing problems to sort of the latest developments COVID-19 related at training camps. We do have some players who in the last couple of days have tested positive. We've learned of positive tests of Major League players. There have been a number of them. I'm not going to go through the entire list, but some of them we have learned. Oakland Athletics starting pitcher Jesus Luzardo tested positive for COVID-19 and was reportedly feeling well. Boston Red Sox starting pitcher Eduardo Rodriguez, who was in line to be the team's opening day starter, and that could still happen potentially, reportedly did have some symptoms, did test positive, had some symptoms, but is feeling better. It's unclear if he'll be back with the team in time to be ready for that opening day start. If not, the Red Sox will likely turn to Nathan Eovaldi for the opening day start for them. Another player who has tested positive, San Diego Padres minor league infielder Jorge Mateo, who was just acquired from the Oakland Athletics in a trade last week. We actually mentioned that on the show. Has tested positive and has experienced some symptoms, according to media reports. A number of players have also joined their teams in recent days. Of course, there's been a number of players who have not been at training camp, who teams have not been able to discuss the reasons for that. And, it's not wise to speculate too much in those cases because a player could not be reporting because they have tested positive. A player could not be reporting because they have come in contact with someone who has tested positive. Or it could be a completely different reason altogether. So, it's difficult. We shouldn't really speculate too much in those situations. But we have learned in the last couple of days a number of players who we hadn't had really accounted for have arrived at training camps with their teams. That includes Cardinals pitcher Carlos Martinez. He cleared COVID-19 testing protocols and joined the Cardinals for their workouts. The Cardinals are still without young pitcher Alex Reyes and their likely closer for the year coming into the season, Giovanni Gallegos. Boston Red Sox third baseman Rafael Devers has rejoined the Red Sox at Fenway Park. That happened yesterday. He had been doing individual work on his own on the side after possibly being exposed a few weeks back, but he has tested negative multiple times. And Cleveland Indians outfielder Franmil Reyes returned to Progressive Field on Wednesday. He had been held from camp the last couple of days after attending a party over the holiday weekend where people were not wearing masks. And Indians manager Terry Francona told reporters that Reyes apologized for his actions and that Reyes is not in any sort of trouble. He is back with the team, of course, starting yesterday. And a couple players we've learned in the last couple days have been missing from team workouts. There's been a number of names who've popped up who are essentially unaccounted for in terms of the teams not being able to disclose the situation with those players. We've learned that Pittsburgh Pirates closer Keone Kela is not in camp with the team. The same for San Francisco Giants speedy outfielder Billy Hamilton and pitcher Harleen Garcia. Those are just a couple of the names who we've learned in the last couple of days are not with their team in training camps. So that's sort of the latest quick rundown on some of the names that we may not see pitching ready or playing ready for opening day, and some players who have arrived on the scene. Just a quick update on that. Final real COVID-19 related topic for today, as we kind of start the show typically with sort of a where things stand, and then we'll dive into some of the more of the fun, typical headlines, typical preseason stuff later in the show. Final thing I think is really important to talk about today, and that is what we've learned in the past couple days, in the past week or so, about players and their experiences with COVID-19. So we've learned over, in basically the past week, a number of MLB players who have tested positive for COVID-19. At least at the time of those reports, many players were apparently not experiencing any symptoms. That includes Arizona outfielder Cole Calhoun, Tampa Bay outfielder Tommy Pham, Yankees second baseman DJ LeMahieu, Royals catcher Salvador Perez, Twins catcher and infielder Willens Astudillo, and several others. It's been reported that they are tested positive but not experiencing any symptoms, at least at the time. However, it's important to note that several players, like we talked about, have been missing from training camps, with teams unable to comment. And there have been multiple major leaguers documented in reports that have experienced significant symptoms from the coronavirus. Of course, Atlanta Braves first baseman Freddie Freeman tested positive. We learned that over the weekend, his wife Chelsea posting on Instagram that Freeman had experienced body aches, headaches, chills, and a high fever. Fortunately, we got an update again from Freeman's wife on Monday saying that Freeman was starting to feel better. Atlanta Braves outfielder Nick Markakis, as we talked about, cited Freeman's situation and the symptoms and his experience with COVID-19 as part of his decision to opt out of the season. Markakis saying, I think the biggest thing is I talked to Freddie Freeman the other day, and just hearing him, the way he sounded on the phone, kind of opened my eyes. Freddie didn't sound good. We also learned, and this one didn't receive as much attention, simply because the player is not as much of a star in the game right now. Another player who has experienced significant COVID-19 symptoms is Phillies infielder Scott Kingery, who is in line to be the team's starting second baseman this year. Kingery spoke with NBC Sports' Jim Salisbury the other day and described his experience with the coronavirus, and I think it's really important that really important to sort of to look at how he experienced it. These are some direct quotes from what Kingery said. He said, "It started on a Thursday when I came down with a headache. I tried to play it off, but it didn't go away. Saturday around 10 a.m., I got chills so bad I couldn't move without my whole body shaking. That night, my fever spiked so high that I sweated through my sheets. It left an imprint of my body. My fever broke Sunday morning, and I actually felt a little better. But then 3 or 4 days later, I lost my sense of taste and smell for a few days. That was really annoying. For a week, I was so tired, low energy, fatigue. Then I experienced shortness of breath for a week. I felt like I laid on the couch for 3 weeks without moving. I was tired just going up the stairs." Now, the good news here, fortunately, Kingery says he is completely healthy and symptom-free now. He is still waiting on the negative tests needed to process. He needs to have 2 negative tests. Every player does, to head to camp with their teammates. He said he wanted to let everyone know, from his teammates to fans, that this thing is real, and that he says he's known of multiple people who've had it and all have reacted differently in terms of symptoms. So I think this is really just important to note that obviously we've heard of a lot of baseball players and athletes in general and people across the country who have unfortunately gotten COVID-19 and fortunately experienced no symptoms. And that's obviously great when not obviously it's great that if a person can get through it without symptoms. That's obviously good. We want everybody to be as healthy as possible. But it's important to note that as we hear of several cases where players are feeling great and posting videos and saying, I'm feeling great, that's great. But it is important to note that it is not that way for everyone. That the risks here for players, for people across the country, across the world, are real. And just because the majority of people, especially young and healthy people like athletes, aren't having major symptoms doesn't mean it can't happen. And we saw those examples with Freddie Freeman and with Scott Kingery. The risks that these players are taking, the risks that this virus poses are real and they are significant. And so it's important to have that context in this situation, that this is serious, and it can be serious for even 20-some-year-old professional athletes who are in, of course, outstanding physical condition. So we're going to go ahead and take our first break here on Around the Bases. When we come back, some more fun things to talk about, or at least a little bit more positive, uplifting things to talk about. It was important that we talked about these things at the top. I really believe it's important to kind of keep this all in perspective and what's happening with the testing, what's happening with positive cases. But when we come back, we're going to jump into some other major headlines from across the league. We're also going to revisit the impact that the shortened season could have on one particular area of the game, which is pitchers, starting pitchers in particular. Because I think some things are a little bit different than I and many other media members assumed. Things could be very different at the start of the season than I expected. So that's coming up next. You're watching Around the Bases from 110 Sports. All right, welcome back to Around the Bases, streaming on the 110 Sports Network at 110sportsmedia.com/live. I'm Chris Brown, and as promised, we're going to dive into some other headlines from across Major League Baseball right now. But before we dive into the ones I had prepared, we do have some breaking news. We have just learned within the last couple of minutes, Major League Baseball released the schedule, the regular season schedule, for the 2021 season. That's right, amid the situation that we have right now, still trying to see if we can even get to the starting line for the 2020 season, baseball has released the 2021 schedule. The season does begin on April 1st and will come to an end October 3rd. Obviously, there are a number of obstacles, a number of things to get to before we get really into the 2021 schedule, but that is something that's happened just now. The schedule is highlighted by a Yankees-Mets game at Citi Field on the 20th anniversary of 9/11. The league announcing that in a statement that all 30 clubs will be playing on opening day, Thursday, April 1st, 2021. Obviously, there's lots of information, beat writers reporting on teams' individual schedules, how they start and how they end. We're not going to dive into that because that's very team specific and also very far in the future right now, given the situation that we're in. But that is important to note that the 2021 schedule has been released. Also, another thing to note before we get to these headlines here, the Washington Nationals received their World Series rings this morning. So they're going to be the team wishing that there was a ring ceremony in front of a crowd, but that's not going to happen this season. The Nationals are scheduled to kick off the baseball season against the Yankees on opening day. That's 2 weeks from today. So let's go ahead and dive into some of these headlines that we did have prepared for you here today. As you may have heard over the last couple of days, we talked about it on Tuesday. The Redskins and the Indians have both announced that they would evaluate their situations for a potential change of those teams' names. There's reporting from Ken Rosenthal of The Athletic that the Braves are not considering a name change, but they are considering and having ongoing discussions about the team's use of the Tomahawk Chop. Rosenthal writing that the quote, the Chop had became a renewed subject of discussion during the 2019 divisional series between the Braves and Cardinals. Member of the Cherokee tribe, pitcher Ryan Helsley, told the Post-Dispatch in St. Louis last October that the Chop depicts Native Americans, quote, in this kind of caveman-type people way who aren't intellectual. The Braves responded back in 2019 last year by canceling the distribution of 40,000 foam tomahawks to fans before Game 5 of the series, and the team issued a statement then saying it looked forward to a continued dialogue with those in the Native American community after the postseason concludes. That was last year, so again, the Braves apparently still having renewed, I suppose, ongoing discussions about the team's use of the Tomahawk Chop, so that's going to be something to keep an eye on moving forward. A couple injury updates for you. San Francisco Giants first baseman Brandon Belt is dealing with right heel pain. He's in a walking boot. Manager Gabe Kapler says he'll be reevaluated in 5 to 7 days. That was as of yesterday. Kapler said it's too early to count Belt out of the season opener, but at this point it seems like it would not be a surprise if the Giants are without their starting first baseman on opening day. Cubs first baseman Anthony Rizzo, meanwhile, is day-to-day with back tightness, and Dodgers infielder Max Muncy also day-to-day after taking a ball off of his left ring finger. That, according to Dodgers manager Dave Roberts. Also encouraging news here, Yankees starting pitcher Masahiro Tanaka, who was diagnosed with a concussion after taking a line drive off the bat of Giancarlo Stanton, did some limited work outside the last couple of days, and the team is and continues to be encouraged by the way that Tanaka feels. That, according to Yankees manager Aaron Boone, told that to reporters yesterday. Dodgers ace Clayton Kershaw will make his 9th opening day start for the team. Manager Dave Roberts told reporters that on Tuesday that will extend Kershaw's own franchise record for opening day starts. Per MLB's Sarah Langs on Twitter, Kershaw has a 1.05 ERA in his 8 previous opening day starts, and the Dodgers are 7-1 in those games. Also, that 1.05 ERA on opening day starts is the lowest among any starter who's made 5 opening day starts since ERA became an official statistic in both leagues in 1913. So basically, yeah, Kershaw pretty much the best opening day starter there's been who's made opening day starts frequently. The Dodgers are expected to open at home against San Francisco against the Giants on July 23rd. That's 2 weeks from today as part of an ESPN doubleheader to start the MLB season following the Yankees at the Nationals. A couple of other opening day starters have been named. Seattle will be turning to Marco Gonzalez, and Cincinnati will be turning to Sonny Gray. And speaking of Cincinnati, Reds pitching coach Derek Johnson said on Tuesday that the team is considering using Trevor Bauer as a starter every 4th day instead of every 5th day, so he'd be pitching on 3 days rest. It's something Bauer has notably advocated for frequently in the past couple of years in his time with the Indians. Bauer has pitched on 3 days rest just twice in his career, and he hasn't fared well. Opponents have a .928 OPS against him in those games. But again, a very small sample size there, so maybe nothing, but that would be really interesting if we have a starting pitcher going every 4th day. Bauer had some struggles last year, but he's proven to be a pretty durable arm, so we'll see how that plays out. All right, let's go ahead and shift gears here one more time to something that I talked about last week. Actually, it was on last Tuesday, one of the first, or our very first episode of Around the Bases here on the 110 Sports Network, which was we talked about some different ways the season itself and baseball itself will be impacted by the shortened schedule. We're learning more and more over the last couple days about how managers are likely to approach the unique season that lies ahead. Like I said, we talked about some of the impacts. One of the things I mentioned was that I didn't think we'd be seeing any starters go 5 or 6 or more innings out of the gate. I kind of figured that, starting pitchers, part of the reason spring training is so long is, in normal circumstances, is for them to get stretched out and get in a rhythm, and that I kind of figured given the layoff and then the shortened training camp that we're in right now, the pitchers were not going to be able to get stretched out quickly, and that we'd see a lot of piggybacking, a lot of, it takes 6 pitchers to get through the game for one team, even under good circumstances, because the starter's going to throw 3, and then somebody throws 3, and then somebody throws 1, and then 1, and as far as innings on the mound. But that may not be the case in all situations. Reds manager David Bell said yesterday, quote, "We're confident our starters can go deep into games from the beginning." Lindsay Adler, who covers the Yankees for The Athletic, tweeted, "Me for the last 3 months. Expect short outings from starters to begin the season. Garrett Cole throws 5 innings in the team's first full sim game." So Garrett Cole, in his very first outing in the simulated game, an inter-squad game with the Yankees, throws 5 innings. And Texas Rangers starter Lance Lynn is going to be their opening day starter. He threw 83 pitches over 6 innings, 6 scoreless innings on Tuesday in an inter-squad game. In his very first spring training or summer training camp outing, whatever you want to call it. So it seems that at least some pitchers will be ready to go out of the gate in the shortened season, that we won't be necessarily seeing no starters going deep into games out of the gate. We could see, if Garrett Cole's throwing 5 innings in his very first training camp outing, I don't see how, it seems likely that in good circumstances he could throw 7 at least on opening day. Of course, that's assuming things go well, but that potential exists for Garrett Cole to go out there against the Nationals and throw 7 innings of 1-run ball, which is not something I thought we'd have the potential to see out of the gate. And that's not, I can't say that there's some just major exciting ramifications of that. But, it could make for less pitching changes out of the gate. early on in the season. Now, it's important to note that plenty of teams will probably take an easy approach, easing in some starters, piggybacking pitchers. The Braves are one team that's discussed. They have, I believe, a couple extra starters that are in a battle for a rotation spot that they could just piggyback some guys from the start. And I'm sure there'll be some teams with players who are maybe coming back from injuries or injury prone, workload concerns, whatever it may be, who just throw their starters out there for 3 or 4 or 5 innings their first times out there. But it seems like, especially in the case of some veterans and some guys who have proven to be durable, that they've stayed in good game shape over the past few months, and that teams may be willing to let them go throw 80, 90, even 100 pitches in their first outings of the season. So that's something important. That's something that could be interesting in terms of how the things are played right out of the gate. Things might not look as different 2 weeks from now in terms of starting pitching as myself and several others in the baseball community expected. All right, we're going to take one final break here on Around the Bases. When we come back, some fun little notes, fun facts, tidbits, just some silly, fun, uplifting little facts to send us off toward the weekend. Odds and ends coming up next. Then we'll have a little bit of a preview of what's coming up on Around the Bases next week. Have some exciting things coming up on our shows next week. That's all ahead. Stay with us. You're watching Around the Bases on the 110 Sports Network. All right, welcome back to Around the Bases here on the 110 Sports Network. I'm Chris Brown. As always, we're streaming at 110sportsmedia.com/live. Also available on demand on Spotify, on Apple Podcasts, and on YouTube, as well as at 110sportsmedia.com. A quick note for you before we get to odds and ends. Brian McTaggart of MLB.com, the Astros beat writer, reporting that Alex Bregman, Astros third baseman, is back at Minute Maid Park today. As expected, I mentioned Bregman near the top of the show as being a player who was held out of the team's training camp yesterday due to continued testing delays in Major League Baseball, and Bregman now back with the team at Minute Maid Park today. So did want to note that. Now we'll go ahead and jump to some odds and ends for the day, just some fun little facts and interesting statistics, some streaks coming to an end. We'll talk about that here. So we'll start with the restaurant to be named later. So the Brewers apparently have a restaurant overlooking Miller Park, which is called the restaurant to be named later. First of all, somebody could maybe have helped the Brewers come up with a little bit better of a name. That would be great. But I suppose if they're going to go with a name like that, you might as well lean into it, and that's what the team is doing. As we all know, COVID-19 has disrupted a lot over the last few months. On Tuesday, the Brewers announced that fans will have to wait a little bit longer to visit the restaurant to be named later because they announced it will be reopened on a date, you guessed it, to be named later. Oh boy, that was one of those things that makes you sort of shake your head and just be amused, but that's a little cringy, but also just funny at the same time. All right, here's a couple of on this day notes that I thought were really interesting. MLB Stats on Twitter yesterday noting that on this date, and that this date being yesterday's date, back in 1962, Stan Musial hit 3 home runs in one game. And that's really impressive when a player does that, but it's not as if others haven't done that. We saw Scooter Gennett do that a couple of years ago. So what made this 3-homer game so special for Musial, it was a 15-1 victory for the Cardinals over the Mets in New York. It was that the 24-time All-Star became the oldest player in Major League history to hit 3 home runs in a game. I believe he was 42 years old that season. Interesting stat there. Another on this day, this one with Tuesday's date, Stats Inc. tweeted that on July 7th, 1948, Satchel Paige signed his first MLB contract on his 42nd birthday. That season, Paige posted a 2.48 ERA and won the World Series. In the 71 seasons in Major League Baseball since then, there hasn't been a single pitcher of any age to have a sub-250 ERA and win the World Series in their first MLB season. Something that hasn't been done in 71 years. Last time it's been done, 42-year-old Satchel Paige. And this last fact here, really interesting. The longest non-interrupted series in American sports history is likely coming to an end in 2020. This is an incredible fact. It comes from baseball historian Ed Hardig, who told it to MLB.com's Jordan Bastian. So what is the longest non-interrupted series in U.S. sports history? Well, since we're talking about it here, you probably rightly assume that it is baseball related. But it doesn't involve, as I might have thought, the Red Sox or the Yankees or the Cardinals or the Reds, really historic franchises. No, it's the Cubs and the Braves. The Cubs and the Braves have played each other each and every Major League Baseball season since 1873. And that's going to come to an end, most likely, this season. Because, of course, given the schedule this year, teams will only be playing other teams in their region. So the Braves will only be playing NL East and AL East teams. Meanwhile, the Cubs will only be playing NL Central and AL Central teams. So no Cubs-Braves in 2020. Now, maybe they meet in the playoffs. That's the way that they could still happen. But assuming that that doesn't happen, after 146 seasons, the longest non-interrupted series in American sports history, will come to an end this season. That's pretty remarkable. Another interesting tidbit from Hardig, the Cubs' July 24th opener will end a stretch of 298 days without a Cubs game. That is the longest such streak, the longest amount of days the Cubs have gone without playing a baseball game since they joined the National League in 1876. And a final note, didn't make the graphic because I just saw it just this morning, just a little bit ago here. On this date, another on this date, this one actually being today's date, July 9th, in 2002, the MLB All-Star Game ended in a 7-7 tie after 11 innings. But the reason being that both teams had used all their available pitchers. So I do not remember that game, just a few years old, but people who have been baseball fans for a long time will remember that game. July 9th, 2002, the MLB All-Star Game ending in a tie for just the second time in its history. The only other time the All-Star Game ended in a tie, 1961, due to rain. All right, so before we go here, that's odds and ends for this Thursday, July 9th. Before we go, a note about what you can expect to see here on Around the Bases next week. Obviously, this week we have been talking a lot about testing, a lot about the problems that baseball has been having in testing, about players who've been opting out, about players who've been arriving, about players who we don't know what their status is. Because I really think that's been important to acknowledge the reality of the situation that's going on. This is not, as we all know, regular circumstances. And so as much as we all want sports as a way to escape from, perhaps more now than ever, from the day-to-day realities, the fact is that sports in this context cannot themselves escape from the day-to-day realities of life in this country and the problems that we are facing as a country right now, as a world. So it's important I think, to talk about those realities, that we do not have a guarantee that 2 weeks from now we will indeed be starting the baseball season. Fingers are crossed, but we don't know that for sure. And we also don't know that even if we start the baseball season, that we will end the baseball season as intended. So it's important to acknowledge those things, acknowledge the situation, acknowledge the players who are out, acknowledge the testing problems, because, frankly, as Jake Diekman, Oakland Athletics reliever, said, look, it's the number one thing. There is no baseball in 2020 without this testing. And there's no baseball in 2020 if the testing doesn't go well. So I think that's why it's been important to spend that time, the time that we have, talking about those things. And it's not going to be the last time we talk about those things. Hopefully, testing things figure themselves out, or their baseball figures out the testing problems, the league does. And it's not something we have to talk about and address too much, but I imagine one way or another we'll be talking about it in the future. And as I mentioned on Tuesday, it is a challenge to pivot from things like Freddie Freeman is out with COVID-19, he's experienced some significant symptoms, and then all of a sudden pivot to, how are the Braves going to win the NL East? There's a part that feels wrong about that. These are players, and these are people whose health is of utmost importance. It's the first priority. And there's also just so much uncertainty right now about the timetables for players who are unaccounted for, who haven't arrived, who are out with COVID-19. We don't know what their timeline is. Of course, their health, again, most important, but we just don't have guarantees right now. It's also, like I said, as far from a sure thing we'll have baseball in 2 weeks. At the same time, if things do work out, as everyone hopes, we will have baseball starting in 2 weeks. So amid the uncertainty of these situations, it is also appropriate to get ready for that and be excited about the potential of baseball if we want to be. And that's okay as well. It's a tricky balance, but it is possible, I really believe. So, starting next week, in addition to continuing to update you on the latest as far as testing, as far as what players are saying, as far as the restart process, we are going to begin some of the typical season preview type things that you would see heading into a regular baseball season. we're going to start division previews next week. So we're going to be doing, barring anything crazy happening, which certainly could happen in the next 5 days, we are going to get into division previews on Tuesday. We'll go over projected standings for each division, my predictions, key players, big storylines for each team. We'll do a rundown of each team. The plan is right now to start with the West divisions on Tuesday and work our way east each episode. So West divisions Tuesday, Central divisions Thursday of next week, and then next Tuesday, the Tuesday following that, we'll be talking about East divisions. That is the plan right now. Like everything else, very subject to change. Just want to update you on what you can expect starting next week. And hopefully we're in a situation where testing and other things go smoothly. Going forward the next few days, and that we're able to get to some of those typical preseason, more fun, exciting things to talk about. What are the keys for the upset? What are these star players going to need to do? Who needs to rebound? What prospects could emerge? We'll get into those kind of things hopefully beginning next week. But that is going to do it for today's episode of Around the Bases here on the 110 Sports Network. Thanks so much for watching, and as always, a reminder that 110 Sports Network coverage continues with the J-Mole Show tomorrow at 11 a.m. Eastern, and then again on Monday, and then Touchline Talk with Josh Doring airing at 11 a.m. Eastern on Tuesday, and then back with you again at this time slot, 1 p.m. Eastern on Tuesday. And a reminder that all shows, again, on the 110 Sports Network, available on demand. Search for 110 Sports on Spotify, on Apple Podcasts, on YouTube, or just go to 110sportsmedia.com. So thanks for watching, stay safe, and I will talk to you on Tuesday.